Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to discuss how Dark and Darker's approach to itemization is in many ways lacking in comparison to its peers in similar genres. Now don't get me wrong, some of the elements of itemization they have are really great, but is it really enough to ensure longevity for the title and its fans? As things currently stand, I would have to say no. Now when it comes to Dark and Darker, one of the coolest features when it comes to itemization is the existence of unique items which have what I'll call legendary aspects. These come in the form of set weapons which can only be obtained as a rare drop from difficult bosses located in the hardest dungeons. However, that's kind of where it ends for cool gear, and that's a bit of a problem. For 90% of the player base, or even more, there's a good chance they're never going to see a unique. And that means that gear below this rarity has to be exciting in some way, and as it currently stands, it just isn't. To get started, we have to first understand the current itemization in Dark and Darker, and this begins with item qualities. Item qualities have been used in most looter genres, and it is no different in Dark and Darker. Item qualities include common, uncommon, rare, very rare, legendary, and then finally unique. Now each rarity besides common have affixes, and these are the plus bonuses which you can see on your armor and weaponry, and these are usually the ones that are RNG rolled when you find the item. Normal items have no affixes, uncommon items have one affix, rare items have two affixes, and this continues linearly all the way up to unique items which have 5, as well as a legendary aspect for certain unique named weapons. Items in the unique category are the rarest for a reason. You cannot get them in the traditional way you would normally acquire gear. You can only obtain them if you play in the high roller mode, and this is characterised by tougher opponents, tougher players, but also by the chance to drop rarer loot. To play you must pay 100 gold and be at least level 15, which is already a little bit of a barrier for entry for a lot of players. However, even there it is not easy to get these unique items, as only the bosses have the chance to drop this kind of gear. So if you want to get it, you have to face the toughest challenges the game has to offer. It's also worth mentioning that weapon stats are random, so this means that even if you manage to get a piece of unique gear, you can still receive very unhelpful bonuses which cannot be changed or altered, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. So far, these affixes are fixed to stat bonuses such as physical damage increases and boosts to strength, agility and other base stats. Affixes currently fall into a very generic category that most classes can find useful in some way or another. However, there are exceptions where certain stats such as knowledge are only really beneficial to spellcasters, and are completely useless for martial classes. So now that we all know how loot and itemization works in Dark and Darker, what exactly is the problem besides uniques being extremely difficult to obtain, as they really should be? Well, every other piece of equipment, including legendaries, are just straight up kind of boring. I was a solo player in the test, and had a lot of success and was able to play a lot of my runs with very rare and legendary gear, and none of the runs really felt that special. Sure, I felt stronger, I could 1v3 easier, and quite often I queued regular dungeons and I felt like the BBEG. But at the end of the day, I was just wearing armor and slaying with weapons that had base stat boosts, and didn't really affect my playstyle, skills, or character in any interesting or exciting ways. As a fighter, I just put on my equipment that had good armor rating, and I W-keyed my opponent swinging my massive schlong, sword, and that's pretty much it. Essentially, the problem I see with the current path of itemization is all of the gear is just too similar. Common fine cuirass looks and feels the same as having a legendary cuirass, except one just has better armor rating and a few extra bonuses that don't even feel unique in themselves. And this goes for all of the loot tiers I mentioned above, so if you're not using a unique weapon, you're just an average Joe. Alright, so now that I've slandered what is probably my favourite game of the decade, now I want to talk about what Ironmace could do to expand upon their itemization in the future, and make Dark and Darker have greater depth and enjoyability for all of its player base. First off, I would love to see Dark and Darker take a thread from Diablo's itemization. Now I'm not a crazy Diablo player, but I do love the creativity and depth of the itemization in certain Diablo games. It only takes a quick look at Asmongold finding his first legendary in the new Diablo to really see how good it can make you feel acquiring something that's unique and actually changes your character and playstyle.
Hey, yo, boys, what's up with that? Alright, let's go. Guys, I beat the game.
And it's not just legendaries. Sometimes getting a rare item that gives you a certain skill or benefit or interesting affix can be exciting too. That's what I want to see in Dark and Darker. In order to do this, we'd have to expand aspects down to lower levels of gear, which would obviously be watered down and not have the strength of unique aspects. or add greater depth to the current AFFIXES. Let's start with the latter. An expansion to AFFIXES could fall into two categories: a more generic category or a class-specific category. More generic, interesting AFFIXES could be anything such as enemies who have their back turned to you take 10% more damage from your attacks, or perhaps you just have a percentage increase to damage based on your distance to the enemy. Whereas class-specific, for instance, could be that using Second Wind as a fighter grants your next attack plus 20% damage, and this would encourage you to play more aggressively and actually alter your playstyle. Now the second point, and perhaps one I'm not 100% sure of myself yet for Dark and Darker, is perhaps having affixes or aspects which grant an actual skill. As a massive fan of complex and diverse playstyles, it could be interesting to see weapons and armour have affix roles for granting skills, which would otherwise only be exclusive to other classes. You could have a fighter multi-classed into a ranger who can fire 3 shots in quick succession from his bow just because he found an item which grants him this skill. Now, this could definitely be too strong, so maybe it would be a watered down version or a lower level of the skill. Or maybe it would just be better keeping this strictly down to a skill tree, and maybe Ironmace have plans for multi-classing in the future. I think it could also be interesting to allow for players to reroll a singular affix for a price at a vendor or in exchange for a certain rare item which can only be found in the dungeons. I see this working in a similar way to Terraria, where you exchange a certain amount of gold at the Goblin Tinkerer to change the affixes tied to a certain weapon. Can't tell you how many times I paid ridiculous amounts of gold to purchase ruby or cobalt armor just to have all of the rolls be absolutely terrible. Having the chance to reroll at least one of these 4 affixes would have been a game changer. But anyway, that's enough about affixes. Let's talk unique aspects. I have so many ideas for how this system could be improved. However, my favourite idea by far is the creation of runes or gems. Imagine you're walking through the regular dungeon and you come across what would normally be a normal skeleton captain, already a tough opponent. But his sword is on fire. And after you kill him, what is now a mini-boss for you and your party, you can steal this rune or gem from his sword and extract it outside of your raid, which you can then inscribe into a piece of your own weaponry. Now it doesn't need to be crazy powerful, and this would really change the landscape of lower level gear. Suddenly your rare longsword that you survived 5 runs with is now a flame tongue from Dungeons and Dragons with dwarven runes etched across the blade. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds pretty fucking cool to me. The possibilities here are really endless, and the inscriptions really are up to your imagination. This would bring greater attachment to gear, give people more reason to use certain weapons and armour, although unique, and also make encounters with regular enemies a lot more interesting. Another idea I have is to mix up the combos, fighting styles, and appearance of weapons and armour. Now this could be done in many ways. First off, changing the combos of a weapon could be tied to the runes which I mentioned before, or maybe something else entirely. Just for this example, I'll stick with the runes. Safe to say that once you've used or died to a weapon enough, the moveset becomes very bland and predictable, which, don't get me wrong, is good for consistency. But encountering someone with this burning longsword that I mentioned before, who is swinging and stabbing in a different combination from the regular longsword, would be absolutely terrifying and pretty cool for both sides. It would definitely make for some more unique encounters in the dungeons. As far as appearances go, this could be tied to where you found the item or which enemy dropped it upon death. For instance, if I go to the Goblin Caves, I doubt the short sword that I steal from a dead goblin is going to look the same as the one which I stole from a legendary chest in the regular dungeon. No, it's going to be rusty, it's going to be bloodied, and maybe it's even going to be chipped. Now this obviously doesn't really affect gameplay and definitely isn't of importance, but small changes like this to items in the future could help make certain items feel a little bit more special and unique. Anyway, these changes could give more depth to lower level gear without sacrificing the unique aspects granted by only the rarest unique items. It would also improve the casual experience for most players who will likely rarely or never see a unique weapon in their normal amount of time playing the game. The benefits of this kind of system would be both casual and hardcore players having more depth and customization when it comes to their playstyle, and just an improvement to the game loop in general. Anyway, we'll have to see what Ironmace have in store for Dark and Darker in the near future, and if you guys have any suggestions or cool ideas, let me know in the comments, because I would love to hear them. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and I shall see you in the next one.